Today's guest has been researching paranormal UFO phenomenon since 1986. He is a MUFON investigator that has authored 27 books and has his written work published in many different magazines and newspapers. Some of his written work includes The Schoolyard UFO Encounters, Undersea UFO Base, and Inside UFOs. I'd like to welcome Preston Dennett to the show. How you doing, Preston?
I'm doing good, doing very good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And like I said earlier, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you got a lot going on to sit down and chat with us. I'd like to encourage our listeners to check out your YouTube channel. I think you did a really nice job presenting excuse me, the evidence in a systematic way, like with the information in the articles. I was watching one of your videos today, and I was clearly impressed because I think oftentimes people will just kind of talk about things, and you present it in a way that's almost like a court case, and you're breaking it down and providing evidence, and I thought it was a really nice touch.
Hey, I appreciate that. Yeah, I love digging deep, laying out the facts, letting people make up their own minds. Yeah.
So how did you kind of get interested in this work? Was it an experience that you had, or was it just something that you always felt like driven to try to understand what's going on?
No, I was not interested in UFOs. I actually was kind of repulsed by the subject, didn't believe in it, was very skeptical, was not looking for it at all. But yeah, it was kind of a weird left turn of the Twilight Zone. I heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska. I remember it very clearly, November 17, 1986. The whole family was there. I come from a big family, 6 brothers and sisters. And this pilot comes on the news talking about how he had seen a UFO over Alaska, piloting a commercial Japanese airliner, Captain Kenju Toroshi. It's now a very famous case and very well documented. But at the time, the newscasters just kind of told it very briefly, laughed nervously, joked about it, and moved on. I thought, wow, this pilot just ended his career. I mean, he's got to be lying. What is he thinking? And it got me thinking, why would he do that? Did he really see something? And I started to ask people in my family and my friends, people I worked with. And I got a real shock when I found out about 20, 30% of the people I knew, people I loved and trusted, had had very close encounters. Some were just simple sightings, but geez, I had a family member who saw grays face to face, had a friend who had missing time. I brought it up at work. A lady was chased home from the library with her mom and her best friend. They had missing time. Another coworker, their whole family saw this object darting around. So it was just one thing after another. And I started to think, well, maybe this is real. Yeah, it was not good news as far as I was concerned. I was pretty upset about it.
So and that's kind of what then drove you to kind of the path you're on now.
Yeah, I wanted to disprove it. I wanted to disprove them, and but I kind of knew I couldn't after hearing their accounts. It was clear they were telling the truth. It was clear they weren't misperceiving, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. So I started buying all the books I could find, and I was shocked to find out that this was a serious subject, had been studied for decades. Many very credible people had seen this kind of stuff. There was a government cover-up. That really shocked me. Yeah, started interviewing people formally. I wanted to see UFOs myself, so I was out there looking for them, and did eventually have some sightings. And yeah, it just
Yeah,
kept
I think most people
snowballing.
do that look for them, right?
Yeah, if you want to see a UFO, it's not that hard. It may take a little while, it may take some real effort, but absolutely, they are out there.
So before we get too far into the UFO thing, I mean, first of all, you're probably maybe the most knowledgeable expert I've had on the show when it comes to this subject. So I really want to dig deep into UFOs and really touch on that. But there's a couple quick things, categories I kind of want to just get your opinion on, your idea on, and then we'll move on to the UFO thing. And the first one is cryptids. Your thoughts on cryptids, and maybe even any relationship with UFOs and aliens and stuff like that, as far as like Mothman, Bigfoot, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that was a subject that had heard of, certainly, especially after hearing about UFOs. And I started to ask people more open-ended questions, such as, not did you see a UFO, but have you had any unexplained experience? So I started to hear about ghosts, started to hear about, near-death experiences and premonitions. And it wasn't long before I ran into a UFO case that was associated with Bigfoot. A gentleman in Canyon Country here in Southern California had a UFO encounter, and the next day had a Bigfoot encounter. In some rare cases, these two phenomena do intersect pretty much perfectly. And that was the first case I had. It wouldn't be the last. So I ended up researching Bigfoot as well. I knew it was opening up a can of worms, and sure enough, it was. Uh, Bigfoot is real. The evidence for it is absolutely compelling. I ended up having my own Bigfoot encounter, more than one. So that was another subject that I'm like, wow, this is more than just UFOs. A lot of this stuff is related in some way. I'm still trying to figure that out. But yeah, I'm absolutely a believer that there are a wide variety of cryptids. It's not just Bigfoot, but that's definitely the main one.
So you actually seen a Bigfoot, or you say you had an encounter? Did you hear it in the woods or hear it knocking, or what exactly went down there?
Yeah, both of those two latter ones. I had another lady who had a number of UFO encounters and started having Bigfoot encounters, and she had a lot of supporting evidence. Her roommate had seen them. Her son, it climbed the tree near their home and broke branches. There were footprints, and she called me over, and I did a big long interview with her. She showed me the evidence she had, and we ended up going to look for it because she kept saying it was in telepathic contact with her, which is what the previous witness had said. There's a telepathic aspect to Bigfoot encounters that maybe, a lot of people might not know about that, but sure shocked me. And we ended up going to look for this thing out in the LA National Forest. She lived up in Acton, which turns out to be a pretty rural area. And after researching it, I did find that there was a history of Bigfoot encounters there. So we drove off into the wilderness, not too far from her home, really. And she's like, I think this is where it lives. I think it's right out there. This is where I think it's coming from. And it was dusk. It was getting real dark. And where she was pointing to was a very inaccessible area, very steep canyons, extremely thick brush. There'd be no real way to hike up there unless you were, really well equipped. And we got out of the car. We had equipment. We had cameras. We had sound equipment. And literally, we had just opened the doors. I walked out into the front of the car and was waiting for her. She stepped out and opened the back door and was pulling out the sound equipment when we heard this thing roar. And I've lived in Topanga Canyon. We had cougar. We had, actually we had wildcats living next to our home. Our guy was keeping them as, I guess you would say, pets. And I've been to the zoo. I've had a lion roar next to me. Now, I'm just prefacing this because I know kind of what animals sound like. I'm real into bears. And this was none of those. This was a very loud, very, rumbling roar that sort of echoed in my chest. It was that loud. And the second time it roared again. I could pinpoint where it was coming from, kind of triangulate. And it wasn't far from us. It was right in the canyon there where she said this thing was hanging out. And she says it roared 3 times. I remember it twice, but she got so darn scared. She jumped back in the car and was screaming at me because I was running towards it. I wanted to see this thing. And we had to leave. But yeah, that was my first encounter. I later did hear knocking noises up on Mount Baldy, which were in response to my brother knocking stones on a tree, making really loud knocking noises. And sure enough, there was a response.
That's interesting. That you had mentioned that the telepathic use of telepathy as far as communication. Um, you hear that a lot in UFO encounters too with aliens, right? Telepathic communication.
Yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
something I wonder too, like, psychic mediums are able to like pick up on spirit and communicate that way. Uh, it's almost as if it's like a universal language or something. Um, it's interesting. The thing about Bigfoot is that like oftentimes he can like be there and then he's gone, at least according to what witnesses. I've never had my own personal experience with it, but um do you think it's, and we never find any real physical evidence, right? I mean, there's been like maybe some hair found and maybe some footprints, but do you think that they are, as real as me and you, like, material? Or do you think they're able to kind of travel in and out of dimensions?
Yeah, I've come to believe that they are at least in part interdimensional, as really all creatures are. I mean, we ourselves do have an interdimensional aspect. We can travel out of our body. We will go to the other side at some point. So all things are, in essence, interdimensional. And Bigfoot for sure, they are absolutely physical, no doubt. You can smell them. They leave footprints. People have been attacked. People have been carried, kidnapped. Uh, yeah, lots of hair samples, fecal samples, the whole deal. No doubt that these guys can totally physically manifest. But having researched a number of cases where they, yes, can turn invisible, apparently, can phase in and out of this dimension, they appear to be sentient, wholly intelligent, at least some of them. I think there probably are a wide variety of types. I mean, I know there are. Even across the US, we have very different descriptions, from like the Florida skunk ape or the really
Right.
California, the Sasquatch is very
Mhm.
tall here. But physical and, yeah, I think they have a very, very spiritually advanced, perhaps. Got a
Yeah,
lot of,
perhaps.
yeah.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I mean, if they really do exist, and I don't mean, I don't have no reason to doubt all the sightings. I mean, not everybody's making it up or lying. Um, I it's more plausible to me that they would be somewhat like that than just here, here physically on Earth and just hiding and have not been discovered.
Yeah, well, that explains why people, there hasn't been many Bigfoot bodies, so to speak, recovered. There are some reports of that, which are usually, hidden away. I've tried to track some of these, and often they end up like at the Smithsonian or in private collectors, and we don't hear about what happens to them. But apparently, there are a few cases where that has happened. But I'm guessing that in most cases, they are able to just raise up their vibration or however they do it to transfer to the, I don't know, the fourth dimension or the fifth or whatever's going on here. But yeah, the finding a Bigfoot body does seem to be problematic.
So moving forward, do you believe then that aliens are interdimensional as well? Or are there some that are perhaps from our universe? Or, what are your thoughts on, I mean, it could be a number of things, right?
Yeah, yeah, I've thought a lot about this because there's a lot of controversy about UFO origins and who are these guys, where do they come from. I am a big believer, it's my current assessment, that they are people like us. And by that I mean biological beings who drive their little vehicles around that do leave landing traces. People are scooped up, taken inside. People are implanted. We've had implant removals. We know this is a physical phenomenon. I'm guessing they live on other planets. That's my assessment at this point. I do think that they are perhaps like Bigfoot in that they can travel into other dimensions. That's probably how they were able to travel from star system to star system, because they're not using propellants. They're not moving the way we would, travel across the U.S. or something. They are moving interdimensionally. So I'm guessing they have a very advanced understanding of these sort of things. And that makes sense because we get accounts of them, apparently like stopping time or time traveling or telescoping time and just weird time effects. So that's kind of my assessment at this point. I think that's the explanation which best fits the facts. Classic extraterrestrials, you know, as you would think of people like us, but different.
Yeah, and it's interesting with them. You had mentioned implants. I had a guy by the name of Terry Lovelace on my show not too long ago, and he had a similar situation. But they tend to like track certain people or individuals for like long periods of time, right? I mean, because some of the people that have had these experiences tend to have multiple experiences. Is that what you've come across in your research?
Yeah, as a general rule, someone who's been taken on board has probably had experiences since childhood, and so have their parents and grandparents. It does seem to track families, which to me sort of points towards their interest in perhaps genetics. Uh, yeah, that is definitely a huge factor, but that's not a hard and fast rule. There are people who have a one-off. They just happen to be in the right place at the right time, or wrong place at the wrong time, however you want to look at it. Uh, but they absolutely do track people. I'm not sure if they're using the implants to do that. They can track people and find them wherever they want because people have had their implants removed and the ETs still come right back and re-implant them. I mean, I interviewed a lady who had that happen. She had her implant removed by Dr. Roger Lear, and 2 weeks later, these ETs were right back.
Wow, that's interesting. And I mean, it's obvious that, they're probably not all on the same agenda. They're maybe perhaps from all different places, but what do you think they want with, I mean, I know you said genetic studies, but you think by now, I mean, because there's, evidence of them, far back, right? Prehistoric or even not, maybe not prehistoric, but, a long time ago, ancient civilizations that of potentially had sightings and had experiences with um, aliens. What do you think they want with us besides studying genetics? Because you think they would have a lot of that information understood, but as highly advanced as they are, I mean, you know, I don't know, because it seems like an awful long time study to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, we know they've been around since, yeah, prehistoric times for sure. We've got cave paintings, petroglyphs from Egyptian times, and we don't even know how old the Egyptian culture is. And medieval wood carvings, Renaissance paintings. There's very good evidence that they've been around for millennia. But I think what we're looking at now is really unprecedented. It was sort of the modern age of UFOs, 1947, Roswell, the whole super wave kind of which swept across the US and the world, which changed everything. That's when they started landing in large numbers. This is when people started being pulled on board in large numbers, which, near as I can tell, is really, yeah, historically new. Yes, there are accounts before that, which where people appear to maybe have been taken on board. I mean, we see some in the Bible with Ezekiel and things like this. But I think now we're looking at something that's very widespread, not nearly as rare as you might think. 1 in 40, 1 in 50 people, maybe. That's what the Roper poll
That
found.
that's pretty common.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we do have a pretty good handle on their agenda, actually. Just because so many people have been taken on board and have had experiences. What we do know is they're very interested in people physically. That's the most common thing people will report is being physically examined and genetic material taken. But beyond that, they do give messages to people. They seem to be very intent on warning us about nuclear proliferation. That's probably the number one message, which started back in, geez, the 1950s with the contactee era, uh, and continued with all the grays. And really, it doesn't matter what type of ET. That's the number one message: warnings about nuclear proliferation, pollution, our warlike ways, climate change, upcoming disaster. They seem to be very concerned about our planet and are really, I think, have an agenda to wake us up to that. They also seem to have an agenda where they talk about alternative energy and trying to get us off fossil fuels. There's been a lot of talk about that. People are often taken into the engine room. That's not uncommon. And they're told how this craft works, sometimes in great detail. And usually it's along the lines of electromagnetism. There's also a very strong spiritual aspect. They seem to be very intent on waking people up to our own abilities to, perhaps do psychic healing or channeling or dowsing or exploring past lives, astral travel. There's a very strong spiritual aspect. Most people who are having regular encounters have a wide variety of paranormal experiences, and precognition and this sort of thing is very common. So I think that's part of their agenda. I think there's multiple agendas, multiple species who have different agendas. I did a study of UFOs hovering over mines, metal mines, copper mines in Arizona, uh, iron mines, titanium mines, uranium mines. They are definitely have an agenda there, because this is not only sightings, they're landing, there are humanoids seen, and these mines are being physically affected. So that's another agenda, I think. There's multiple agendas. I think they're taking our animals, our plants, they're collecting all the life on Earth. Uh, yeah, I think their behavior really falls under the same umbrella as human behavior. They're doing what we would do were we to visit another planet. And there's good and there's bad, but by and large, I'm not afraid of them. I think if they were hostile, this planet is theirs. There's
Yeah,
right. I mean, we
yeah,
couldn't stop them.
that's right. And that's what I was going to get to, was that, they don't, I mean, maybe there's been, situations where people get abducted and through the examination, it feels malicious. But I think in general, they don't seem to have malicious intent. And like you had mentioned, if they really wanted to be malicious and do something, I mean, they could just do it. And there's nothing we could do about it.
Yeah, I flip flop a little bit on that. I have to be honest. When I got into this field, I was horrified. I'm like, wow, these are floating torture chambers. I mean, this is terrible. You can't kidnap people. That's
Right,
not legal. That's not legal
right,
in any country.
right.
And I still have a hard time with that. You can't rationalize it. That's not nice. Even if you're, say, rescuing someone and curing them. Because I do have 300 documented cases where people have been cured of illness. At least tell them, tell them what they're doing. And a lot of people don't get that.
There's such a curiosity for the human race, it seems. Do you think perhaps we were created or genetically modified by some of these creatures, or maybe we were even put here on Earth by
Yeah,
them?
yeah, that is definitely what I think is going on here. I think that sort of shows why they are so interested in us. We got to remember there are human-looking ETs. I mean, seriously, some of these guys look just like us. There's 3 or 4 main categories, and the grays, a wide variety of grays for that matter. Little short ones, little kind of android maybe, emotionless grays, tall grays, tall whites, a whole range of grays. Praying mantis type, that's pretty common.
Right.
Human looking is very common. Strange humanoids of all types, that's another category. But absolutely, I think if you look at the evidence, I mean, in the modern day, we have the hybrid baby phenomena, which is clearly
Yeah.
genetic intervention and manipulation. And if you look at the stories coming out of the Bible, or mating with the gods, this sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
or Native Americans feel very
Mm-hmm.
strongly in many of their cultures that their the ETs are their ancestors,
And then we came from the stars, right?
right? And that's also true in like other Sumer and the Egyptian
Yeah.
cultures. They mentioned the same darn thing. So I'm guessing, yeah,
I
they
mean,
we are.
I've often thought about that, like even just comparing us to other species on Earth. If you really stop and think about it, like we kind of don't really fit in, do we? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. This is something I've been wondering about for a long time. Like, gosh, do we even evolve here on Earth? Did we evolve here? Did we come from here?
because it seems as though everything on Earth, there's an ecosystem and it kind of flows and they kind of, it balances each other out. And then here we are. we have to wear clothing, the sun, is harmful to us. And here we are though, and it seems like everything we do, we actually do harm to the earth, no matter what, we try to do as humans, as a species in general. Like, where, the majority, or if not all species on earth, it's kind of, they're just kind of there,
Yeah, yeah,
synced with earth, and we're not. I don't know.
yeah. The Native American culture, I got to hand it to them because they were in balance, I think, with our planet and really had a good knowledge of
Yeah,
it.
that's a good
I
point.
think, I think a connection to the ETs, and that sort of speaks to that. But yeah, you're right. In fact, I've been saying this for years. I'm like, we're not that well adapted. And I was really pleased to see this book come out by Ellis Silver. Um, I forget what the title is. It's like Humans Are Not from Earth or something along those lines. And
Yeah, I think I read that book. I think I've read that book now that you mention it.
yeah, he made some really good points. Basically, what you're saying, that we're not really that well adapted to this planet. Gravity's a little bit big for us. We burn very easily in the sun, and temperature, and uh, everyone who's anything over 5'10" usually have 5 foot 10 inches will have lower back pain, uh, which is another thing that speaks towards, like, do we really even come from here? I don't know. I don't know. Can only speculate at this point, but I think it's more very possible that we don't, because the human form seems to be universal when it comes to UFO reports, humanoid reports. It's always arms and legs, eyes, mouth, the whole deal. So that really leaves me scratching my head, like, wow, it's very Star Trekky. That kept me out of the field for years. I'm like, I just can't believe this.
It
Uh,
is, and there's the thought, you've probably come across this. There is the thought though that we're manifesting the uh the UFOs and the aliens.
yeah,
That
yeah.
we can manifest our own reality, so to speak, and that as a collective consciousness, we're actually causing these things to occur. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I disagree. I think that there is an aspect of that. The universe does have a matrix-like aspect to it, and I think yeah, reality is in essence sort of in cooperation with our consciousness and our beliefs. But I'm not a believer in the Jacques Vallée, John Keel, Lauren Coleman camp that all these phenomena are from the same source and are wearing different masks and are manifesting according to our beliefs. So I've talked to many people who don't believe in any of this, and they still have experiences. And it's not logical. It's a very anthropocentric theory, which throughout history has turned out, not to be true. We aren't the center of the universe. It's a, and the idea of extraterrestrials is very logical, especially when you look at how vast uh, our
Uh,
universe is.
Yeah,
Uh,
and perhaps multiple universes on top of our universe. Yeah, that's valid.
Yeah, I just don't feel like we're the only ones here, and we're not the ones who are creating this universe. Uh, I think you can take the humans out of this equation, and the universe is still going to exist.
Mhm.
Bigfoot is not going to go away just because we do.
Right.
Uh, these are all real, honest to God entities, separate phenomena, which have very strong correlations and parallels. But that doesn't mean they're all the same thing. I don't think this UFO phenomena is demonic. I don't think it's angelic. I don't think it necessarily is all the same thing, wearing different masks. I think there's probably something to that, though. I think probably there are trickster spirits that can put on any appearance they want. And we do know the ETs can put on any screen memory they want. They can appear how they want. But if you look at the totality of all the Greys sightings, they're so darn similar. It's pretty clear to me that Greys are exactly what they appear to be, Greys. That is their appearance. Uh, but we're still a very new field. I am at the point now where I'm like, it's not really fair to call this a mystery, though, because I think that there are people on this planet, I'm talking about perhaps the secret government, who have these crashed saucers, who have the alien bodies, who have had live interactions with ETs on an ongoing basis. They know that there are ETs out there in the classic sense. We don't have access to a lot of that sort of hard evidence that lays to rest all these questions of where these guys come from or what are they. But that's going to come. I think we are moving towards disclosure. We're moving towards open official contact. And I think the day is going to come where a lot of these questions of UFO origins are going to be settled to some degree.
Yeah, I really wanted to get into that with you too about the Tic Tacs and the recent Navy, coming forward and kind of revealing that there's something in the skies that they don't know or understand. It's interesting though that it just seems so like it was purposefully, put out there for us. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I got in this field in 1986, and immediately there were people talking about, oh, government is going to disclose. And they didn't. And what we were seeing is this sort of drip, drip, drip. I mean, we have very high level people within government and the military industrial complex who have made very positive statements. I mean, let's face it, we have presidents who've seen UFOs. We've had governors, senators, representatives, and that's just in the US. It's the same is true across the world. There has been an ongoing process of disclosure that's been very slow and very tightly controlled. And until recently, there's been no real movement at all within official circles. By that I mean with a sitting government. Most of these people who come forward are retired or have moved out of government. So I'm pretty excited actually to about the Tic Tac incident, about the Pentagon's recent statement, which slid under the radar, which should have been front page news, that they said, we have material from other worldly vehicles. Direct quote. That is explosive. So that is very exciting to me. But I don't think they're doing it because they want to. I think this is something that they've been forced into because there's been so many whistleblowers, because the truth has come out, because they're losing control of the situation. If they don't disclose, they're going to lose all credibility. They're going to lose power over this whole situation. They're being forced into this. Their cards have already been played.
Right, they're trying to get out in front of it before it's too late to. Yeah, that
Exactly.
that
Because
makes sense.
we're neck deep in this. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not just Roswell. Uh,
right.
that's a very famous incident, but there's the Paradise Valley crash in Arizona. There's the Aztec crash, Kecksburg crash in Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
It's the very tip of the iceberg. I've written a number of books about various states, California, New York, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, and New Mexico. They
speak.
all have UFO crashes, all of
Yep.
them.
Speaking of Arizona, I actually had a sighting, personal sighting, right over Luke Air Force Base out there. It was real similar to the Phoenix Lights. It looked similar from what I seen. It was like 5 red lights, and they were kind of flash. I don't know. It was strange. It was strange. It lasted for about 15, 20 minutes. It was close to our Luke Air Force Base out there in Phoenix when I lived out there. But that's interesting. So your thoughts on then maybe like Bob Lazar? I mean, does that seem like a pretty legit story, or?
Yeah, I obviously don't. I'm not equipped to say whether or not he is telling the truth or not. But from a corroborative standpoint, I felt like right off the bat, that, yeah, he's probably telling the truth, because it's not just Bob Lazar. There's quite a few whistleblowers, and I've talked to some of them myself. And I interviewed a guy who was on his deathbed, literally in a
Mhm.
hospital, who was
No
telling me,
reason to lie.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so many people are saying this. He's getting a lot of vindication now, I think. I'm really interested to see about this upcoming document dump that our own government is supposed to have forthcoming. We'll see if that goes through. But yeah, I think it's going to be a changed world as events sort of escalate, because the cover up, while it has been very effective for decades, has also become right now an open conspiracy. I mean, it's leaking like a sieve. They have not been able to keep this subject secret. It's a very popular. It's the second most popular subject on the internet, next to you know what. So I'm thinking, yeah, we're going to be seeing a lot more stuff coming out. It's going to be a tidal wave of information.
I hope so. I can't wait. That's what we want, tidal wave of information. Real quick, there's a lot of people that don't really discuss this so much, but it's something that's starting to, I guess, gain some steam that I keep hearing about. Submergible UFOs and stuff like that. I know you've written I think you published a book on it. What can you tell us about that? And is just go ahead. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, USOs, unidentified submersible objects. Very interesting because I started getting accounts of that from the very beginning. It turns out that where I'm based here in Southern California, off the Southern California coast, it's extremely active. It's one of the most active places in the world. I mean, literally mile for mile, the stretch of water between Santa Catalina Island and the mainland is one of the top 10 producers in the world. For sure, I've documented like 150 cases and ended up writing a book about it because I kept getting so many cases, and really did not want to investigate it. I was pretty busy on other projects, but started to be asked to speak about it, and that brought in more cases. I went on TV and did History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs. That was super successful. They called me back for another show. They said they had record ratings on that. So I went, that snowballed. And so I found myself, wow, now I'm like a USO researcher. They are in our oceans in large numbers, no doubt. It's very little information on this for years and years. I think Ivan T. Sanderson was really the only researcher who had tackled this in his book Invisible Residents for a long, long time. And yeah, it's all over our oceans. They're in lakes. I've gotten reports in tiny little bodies of water, rivers. They are hiding there in large numbers, I think because they can. They have the technology to fly into the ocean at very high speeds and fly out. We have nothing, at least officially, that can do that. And it's a perfect place for them to hide, and we can't get to them. We just don't have the technology advanced enough to do it. So I think that that's probably where they've been hiding for a very long time.
That's fascinating. And you were talking about having the time to do it. I don't know how you have the time to do anything. I mean, with what the work you've put out is amazing. I've talked to a lot of people. And they say, just writing one book or getting one or two books published is a task. And you've managed to do what, 27?
Yeah, I have to tell you, it hasn't been easy. I've been doing it a long
It's
time. It's a lot
impressive.
of, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think that helps. It does cut into my personal time, my TV watching time. And I was working full time all these years until just last year. Now I'm part time. But yeah, I mean, if you enjoy it, I think that really helps. It's within my family. I'm compelled to do this. I've had my own encounters. I think that's a factor. And
Can you tell us a little bit about some of those?
for my own stuff, yeah, sure. I wanted to see UFOs for myself. When I found out this was real, I'm like, well, I'm not going to believe it until I see it. I mean, I know it's true, but I really want to see it. And started, I think the very first sighting of any consequence at all was when I went to a UFO meeting, and there was a contactee there talking about his experiences. And he was a great presenter. Andy Rice was his name, or Reese, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And he talked about his own experiences and said, afterwards, if you want to go out, I'll try to call down a UFO for y'all. I'm like, really? Amazing. Okay. And this was in downtown Santa Monica, in a very urban area. And there was 50, people at this meeting. And afterwards, after it ended, only about 10, 15 people came out to watch this guy do this. I thought, wow, are these people crazy? Don't they want to see a UFO? So we went out there in the park across the street from where the meeting had been held. And I looked up at the sky and went, well, this is not going to work. You can't see a single star in the sky. And our cars driving around us on each side. I'm like, well, we'll see. And he got us all in a circle. We meditated for a couple of minutes. I'm like, oh God, I don't really want, this is not what I signed up for. I wasn't really into all the spirituality at that point. But so we meditated for 10 minutes or so. And he says, okay, I think they're coming. And he points to the sky and says, look there, look right there. Don't stop, keep looking. And maybe 15 seconds, it looked like a shooting star, but it was very bright and it came swooping down. And it was a little bit ambiguous, but I was impressed. That was sort of my first one. But I was in the middle of investigating this huge wave of sightings in my hometown, Topanga Canyon. This was 1992, 93. And I was just out of my mind with this subject. I'm obsessed. And I'm like, I was just, really studying it intently. And my brother, who had seen a UFO, and my sister-in-law, who is an artist and helping me along with researching it, she would draw the encounters and the aliens that people had seen. So we were kind of a team. I was over at their house in Woodland Hills, talking late into the night. I'm like, well, I got to go home and I got to work. And I was driving to my home in Canoga Park, which is maybe 5 miles away. And was driving down their little side street, and darned if this light didn't appear. I mean, I was coming around this hairpin corner at maybe 2-3 miles an hour, and this little ball of light drops down out of the sky. My first thought was, well, that's a firework, because it was late July. But it clearly wasn't, because came right towards me. And I thought, well, it's a bird. No, it wasn't. It was a ball of light. And this darn little ball of light comes right up to my windshield, size of a golf ball, this soft white orb of light, stops right in front of my windshield, a foot away, maybe 2 feet, but starts going back and forth, and my jaw drops. I'm staring at this thing. It's clearly unexplained, and it shoots straight up. And what do? I honestly don't remember. And I forgot about the whole darn thing. And I was, I'd
Oh
interview
man.
people. Yeah, I would interview people who had missing time, and they'd be like, we didn't talk about it. Actually, we completely forgot. I'm like, how could you forget this UFO that was beamed you up? They're like, I don't know. And it happened to me. It was like, I don't know, some months later, it just popped into my mind, and I got a cold chill. I'm like, oh my God, I remember this. So I think, yeah, I had missing time. And I've only really, took me about 10 years to really realize I don't remember driving home. Because I've seen UFOs a number of times after this. I mean, 10 times at least. Some really amazing,
Do you
telepathic contact. And I don't remember what happened.
do you think they picked you out perhaps in the work you do?
Yeah, that was kind of what I finally came to the conclusion. I started looking into it. I'm like, why me? I'm just a nobody. I'm a bookkeeper from Reseda. I certainly wasn't really influential. Let me see, I don't think I'd even written a book at that time. No, I hadn't. I'd written a few articles, 30, and had been researching no, I hadn't written 30 articles at that one. That was like 6 years into my researcher shows. Not even, 86, yeah, about 6 years. And had just started writing about it, and I wasn't well known at all. But there's this phenomenon known as UFO investigators disease, which was coined by researcher Ed Conroy, who was a mainstream researcher who decided to investigate Whitley Strieber, the famed abductee. And as soon as he did, he started having his own sightings. I'm like, wow, let's look into this. And I found out that a lot of researchers, once they started looking into it, started having encounters. And that's exactly what happened to me. I think the ETs are keeping a very close watch on this subject, and do express an interest in people who express an interest in them.
Oh, I don't like that idea. I don't want nothing like that going down. I don't mind seeing them in the sky, but
No, no, don't be afraid. Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear surrounding this subject. There
Yeah.
is, and I get that. It's unexplained. We don't really know what's going on. Who are these guys? Why are they here? Don't kidnap me. Please don't anally probe me. I hate needles. I don't want any of that. If a gray appears in my bedroom at night, yeah, that's going to make my heart beat like a jackhammer. But after I really looked into this subject, I'm like, well, you know what? I don't think they're trying to hurt people at all. I don't think they're trying to scare people at all. That's not their agenda. They are baffled by our fear um, and our very strong emotions, and they started studying them intently. They seem to be very interested in our emotions.
Have
Uh,
you have you heard of people perhaps even being healed from sickness and stuff? Has there
oh,
been any cases like that that you've come across?
oh gosh, have I? Yeah, I knew a few famous cases in the literature. There was a very famous case in Texas where two police officers were driving along, and one of them was struck by a beam of light. He could feel it on his arm. Well, it turned out he had been bit by his son's baby pet alligator on his finger uh, earlier. It was left a painful gash or a wound on his finger. It was all bandaged up, swollen, throbbing. This beam of light hits him, and the pain's gone. And it was some minutes later, he pulls off the band-aid, and the wound was completely healed, like literally instantly. I knew of another famous case in Peru where a customs official had been struck by a beam of light that cured him of nearsightedness and rheumatism. I knew of another famous case in France, investigated by Jacques Vallée, where a doctor, a medical doctor, a good witness, was struck by a beam of light again, and it cured him of an axe wound on his foot and partial paralysis. These were like three rare cases. I thought, well, this is probably pretty rare. But then I interviewed this lady who was like, oh, you're not going to believe what happened to me. I'm like, what? She says, I had this cyst in my fallopian tubes. It was causing all kinds of problems. It was bleeding. And we were very upset, her and her boyfriend. And she went to the doctor, was MRI'd. She's scheduled for surgery. The day before surgery, and this is how it often goes down, she had an encounter in her bedroom. They came, and she doesn't remember a lot, but she knew they came. She's like, oh no, wonder what this means. She goes for surgery, and they're like, wow, they did the pre-imaging for the surgery, and they're like, we can't find your cyst. We don't know how this could have happened. You must have had surgery. You had surgery, didn't you? She says, no, no, of course I didn't. And they're like, well, yes, you did, because we can see here that there's fluid present in your fallopian tube, which cannot be there unless you've had surgery. And then, is that a laser scar on your abdomen there? That's what that looks like. And she's like, no, 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 I didn't, honest. And she did not want to, tell them what happened. So that was my first healing case. I thought, well, let's write an article. I bet I could find some more cases. So I knew of those three and a couple of others. And I looked into it, and right off the bat, I found like 30, 40. I thought, well, let's dig deep, and I spent a year digging real deep. I found over 100. And that became the subject of my first book,
Wow.
and ended up becoming like the guy on UFO healing cases,
Mm-hmm.
on speaking on it, going on TV, radio, conventions. And every single time I would speak, someone would be quivering and waiting. And I'd have like two or three people come up to me like, oh yeah, they cured me of deafness. I had a tattoo. It became totally infected. They cured it. And just case after case after case. And now, some years later, I wrote out another book. So I've got 300 documented cases of people who've been healed as a result of a UFO encounter, of you name it: colds,
Wow.
minor infections, cuts, wounds, bruises, burns, broken bones, uh, aching back, stomach aches, flu, uh, serious diseases, diphtheria, diabetes, tuberculosis, kidney disease, kidney stones, liver disease, uh, 30 plus cases of people cured of cancer, many, many tumors removed, AIDS. Uh, I mean, it's a long, long list, and some are very, very well documented. Leaves a long trail of baffled doctors. Uh, so, absolutely, this is one of their primary agendas. Spontaneous healing is a recognized medical thing. uh, that doctors can't explain in many cases. Spontaneous remission, disappearance of illnesses, which is often attributed to perhaps angels or prayer or even spirits and stuff. But I think in many cases, it is healings. And of the 300 cases I've documented and collected, that's the tip of the iceberg. You could times that by 100 easy, 1,000. I'm guessing there's many, many people have been healed, because that's not the sort of thing you run to tell people about.
That's really cool. And that's something that, I don't hear a lot of. I listen to a lot of different UFO podcasts and talk to
Oh,
people, and that's interesting. That's really cool.
yeah, that annoys me to no end, because I started really looking deep into this, and every single, I don't want to say every single, but most major researchers have cases like these. I mean, seriously, Bud Hopkins, I cornered him because he never wrote a word about this, and he wrote several books. And I was at a convention with him. I'm like, Bud, do you have any healing cases? He's like, oh, yeah, we do. We absolutely do. I don't know what to make of it, because a lot of abductees have severe illnesses and they're not being cured. But yes, I've absolutely gotten cases. I know David Jacobs has cases. He's had cases of people cured of pneumonia, diphtheria. Richard Boylan does. John Mack, Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith, Tim Beckley. I mean, you name it. Any major researcher out there probably
Why
has cases like this.
why do you think there's such a non-interest of publicizing it or talking about it so much? These researchers have this evidence.
Yeah, I think there's an automatic tendency for anyone who believes they've been healed by aliens to, you know, ah, UFOs are already controversial. And the last thing you want to do is bring up your case that makes you look like you're a believer or a loopy or, off the deep end, because this is the fringe of the fringe. And they've been relegated to almost the trash heap of ufology, which is very unfortunate
It is
because,
unfortunate. I mean, it gets to a point though. I mean, there's so much evidence, and from so many different people that when is it enough is enough that you can finally admit that there's something going on here and that there's aliens and there's UFOs in the sky.
yeah, medical evidence is fantastic evidence. It's absolute uh, physical evidence that something happened. And we've got many cases of people who have, scars or bruises or radiation type illness or sickness as a result of a UFO encounter. The MUFON Investigators Handbook has a section on physiological effects. And what do they call it? Medical injuries. They don't mention healings. And that's that prejudice again against, I think it's partly because of the contactee era of the 50s, which is all about friendly human ETs who took people on tours of the solar system, and which sounds crazy, and it was driven underground. People thought the 1950s contactee era ended. No, it never did. It was pushed underground by this wave of grays abducting people. And that so many people were reporting this that it generated a lot of attention. And the media loves a good, lurid, scary story. Our society is to a certain extent fear-based. So I think that gets a lot of attention. And someone who says that they were cured uh, gets, I think, is more open to ridicule than someone who says they were injured, just because of our own, biases. But yeah, absolutely, it's not nearly as uncommon as people think, and I think points towards the uh, fact that a lot of these ETs are absolutely friendly in the true sense of the word. I've talked to people who have been taken on tours, so to speak, of that they've seen Saturn. I've run across that 2 or 3 times. That happened to Dr. Leo Sprinkle. He's a very major researcher, turned out to be a contactee. And he says, yep, that happened to me. They showed me Saturn. I'm like, wow, that is crazy. So yeah, and many people I've talked to just love their guys. They love these ETs. They call them friends, or even more often family. It's not always the case. Every time I bring up, oh, friendly ETs, there's someone out there who's like, that didn't happen to me. They did terrible things to me. I came back, with some severe injuries and real trauma. So you have a bell curve of behavior, which is very close to the, our own behavior, except it's really skewed more towards the positive, because what I don't see, or what I very rarely see, is what I would call sadistic behavior or torture or just outright, evil, let's hurt this person. They don't get off on that, not like humans do. When a human is kidnapped on Earth, it's not going to end well, or usually doesn't.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they're much more advanced spiritually than humans are, for sure.
Which would make sense because they're very technologically advanced, and those would seem to go hand in hand, though maybe not. I'm not going to say these are all our space brothers. I think that would be very naive. But the evidence speaks for itself. The fact is, we're all still here on our planet, living our lives largely unmolested. Uh, there are a lot of missing people. That makes me wonder. But I was interviewing this lady, doesn't want her name used, but she's had contact with her grays, with these grays, her whole life. And she had hybrid babies. She met her full-grown hybrid son. Took her on board, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm your son." She's like, "Wow, really?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm always going to watch over you." She's been healed on 2 or 3 occasions, and he told her all this information. He says, "What you thought were angels was actually us, and you got to tell people to stop eating meat. You can survive on, vegetarianism. Uh, you got to stop. You got to tell people to stop putting out all the greed and negativity. You're going to destroy ourselves, your planet, like we did." They told her that they've been manipulating human genetics and also animals. They told her they've been manipulating cats and dogs in particular to boost their emotional intelligence to make them more compatible with human relationships. And you can see dogs do have pretty
That's
advanced emotion,
interesting. Yeah,
right?
they do. So do cats. I
And
think they both do.
yeah, and they told her, important here, that if a lot of people go missing from this planet, which we're seeing now, it's us. It's us that's doing it, and it's for the greater good. So I think that there's a fear on the ET's part, or maybe that's not the right word, but they're predicting widespread disasters. And I keep hearing this more and more, this sort of evacuation plan. And I have cases where people have been taken and not returned. So I wonder about that for sure.
Perhaps the people don't want to come back.
Exactly. Yeah. Boy, there was one case where exactly that's what happened. A group of 6, 7 friends would go to their parents' cabin out in the high desert here in Southern California for, occasional weekends, just to have fun, hang out, hike, and stuff like that. And one of the guys, Paul, says, "I'm going to take a walk." And he disappears. He's gone for the longest time. And they're like, "Oh my God, where's Paul? Where's Paul? We're going to have to send out a search party. What are we going to do?" And Paul comes back. He's like, "You're not going to believe it. I came upon a landed UFO." And they're like, "Ah, shut up." And he's like, "No, for real, for real. It was at the base of a cliff. There was these human-like figures. They were bald. They had large dark eyes, wearing white jumpsuits, but were really very human-looking." They took him on board. They told him, "We're studying this area, the environment," and told him some stuff. I'm like, "Do you want to come with us? If you want to come with us, we'll take you." And he's like, "No, I don't think so." I'm like, "Well, we're going to be here next year at this time. So if you'd like to come back next year at this time, and uh, we'll meet with you." And he did. A year went by, and he started giving away his stuff. And his friend, the guy I interviewed, Tony's, um, says, "Oh my God, Paul, are you really going to go out there? And are you going to go with them?" And Paul's like, "Well, I don't know if I'm going to go with them, but I'm going to see if they're there." And he drives off and doesn't come back. And after like 3 or 4 days, uh, Paul's friends, Tony, the guy I interviewed, and Paul's friends and Paul's parents all drive up to the cabin where he went, and they found his car. The keys were in it, but they never found Paul. They had to call the police. It was a missing persons case. The police are like, "What happened?" And Tony's like, "Well, this is all I can tell you." And starts talking about this UFO and aliens. And yeah, I don't know where Paul is to this day. He was a very young man when he disappeared, and it's related directly to this UFO encounter that they had 1 year earlier. I think he's out there living some other planet on a
Yeah,
mothership. I don't know.
that's interesting. That story sounds so familiar. I think I may have come across that at some point. That's very interesting stuff. Do you believe the government then has technology that they've backwards engineered off of stuff that they've obtained? I mean, do you believe that that technology exists from other planets?
Yeah, yeah, I sure do. This is certainly what Bob Lazar was talking about. Ben Rich and a lot of other whistleblowers have said this. I've talked to some myself. One guy was a contractor at Edwards Air Force Base, saw a UFO in a hangar. His employer wouldn't tell him what it was until a year later when he wanted to re-employ him. And the guy interviewed, he's like, "No, I'm not doing it unless you tell me what we saw." He's like, "Okay, yeah, that was reverse engineered. It wasn't an alien craft. It's ours. We reverse engineered it." And Colonel Corso wrote the day after Roswell, talked about how technology like, what did he say, the fiber optics, integrated circuit, Kevlar, night vision, and other discoveries were actually in part pushed forward through technology taken directly from the Roswell crash. And people have tried to debunk him, and in my opinion, not successfully. He's got really outstanding credentials. And I think, yeah, for sure, some of the technology, particularly within computers, and probably most of it's still suppressed. Uh,
Yeah, I was going to
things,
ask you that in our lifetimes, mine and your lifetime, even. I mean, we've seen such an advancement in technology. That's what I was going to get to was, you think then perhaps some of that is based off of other
yeah,
extraterrestrial technology?
yeah, I really, really do, which makes perfect sense because if we really do have all these crashed UFOs, and if you look into it, it's hundreds upon hundreds of crashed UFOs secreted, not just at Wright-Patterson or Area 51. Many Air Force bases have been implicated in this. Norton Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base, many others. Uh, and it's my understanding, according to the whistleblower accounts, some of this technology is so darn advanced, we aren't even close to understanding it. We have UFOs, we can't even get inside. We have UFOs that go inside and they can't understand it. Where's the engine? They don't even, they can't make heads or tails of it. But some of it, yeah. Speaking towards the healing accounts, there's a couple of whistleblower accounts where they've pulled out healing technology, like little devices that can uh, find any tumor in the body or regenerate tissues to the point where it can heal a cut instantly, or sort of anti-age people, cure heart disease, all these wonderful technology that it's still being suppressed. We have free energy, basically, and we don't need fossil fuels, and it's being suppressed due to, I think, greed and power. And
Well, there's speculation that Tesla perhaps they have some information that he, perhaps had free energy as well. Come up with
yeah,
some kind of way to have free energy.
yeah,
To
and he said he was in contact with the ETs. He
Yeah, yeah.
really
Good
believed
point.
that.
Good point. I mean that just the I mean if you just look at even just the cell phone, I mean, or a phone in general, like I mean, it went from, something that was plugged into a wall that was a rotary dial to a supercomputer in your pocket where you can airdrop pictures to the person standing next to you, take pictures, watch videos, connect to the internet.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
whatever you want to do. I mean, it's amazing, and it was a real small window, right? I mean,
yeah. Remember Star Trek, where
yeah,
now we're beyond Star Trek. I mean, we really are. And it's my understanding that a cell phone has more computer power than what we use to bring people to the moon, and that took a whole building of computers. So now makes me really, really wonder what's being suppressed.
yeah.
And
I mean, and that was it's such a short period of time too. I mean, you're talking about in
incredible.
our lifetime. I mean, what, a span of 40, 50 years.
Yeah,
It's
there's no doubt we have anti-gravity. There's been many reports of
Yeah,
that. Several people have said, "Oh yeah, we're traveling to other planets." There's that book, Project Serpo, which I found really interesting. I don't know if it's a true case, but if it's not, it probably is reflective of others, like the alien autopsy. That was widely panned and debunked. My father was in the movie industry. I know some special effects experts, and like, well, if that's fake, they sure did a good job. They must have spent an enormous amount of money on it. And true or not, it's absolutely reflective of the truth. And I do believe that stuff like that is going on for sure. And there's a real, the cover up is still in place. It absolutely is. Uh, people have, our own tax dollars are being used to make us look like idiots and fools and liars and hoaxers if you report UFOs. And if you have physical evidence, watch out. I mean, protect it, because there's a ruthless cover up. People have been killed over this. So I really heartened and encouraged to see that there's uh, being a reversal in that policy. Pilots are now more forthcoming because many pilots see this stuff. I believe astronauts know all about this. In fact, I do have some firsthand information on that as well. I've talked to some pretty interesting people uh, who say that there are two camps within NASA: those who haven't seen it and those who have. Uh, and it's very widespread. They know. NASA knows.
That's fascinating. And perhaps, what do you think some of the cover up is because of trying to, I don't know, maybe for uh, defense reasons, or perhaps just control over the people, or
Yeah, both those. I think it started out that way, and particularly when the modern age of UFOs, 1947. Well, we've got UFO crashes before that. During the Battle of A, 19, I'm sorry, the Battle of LA, the LA air raid, UFOs showed over LA. Thousands of people saw this. There's a very famous picture that was published in the LA Times where this object has searchlights trained on it. We shot at it with 2,500 rounds of ammunition. Apparently, we brought down a craft in that incident. There were multiple craft. And then there's the Cape Girardeau incident in Missouri. That was also early 1940s. So they've known about it for a very long time. From a military standpoint, this has got to be,
yeah, the Foo Fighters in World War II.
yeah, I mean, it definitely affects national security if they're shutting down our nuclear missiles, if they're abducting people and we can't stop them. From a military standpoint, they've got to look at this as like bad news or possibly hostile. So I can see why they initially started out like, we can't tell people. We don't even know who these guys are. We don't know where they're from. We don't know what their intentions are. And that policy was carried on through the decades. Uh, and I think they've sort of painted themselves into a corner to some extent. But ultimately, I think it is about greed and power and control. And that's why it's being covered up to a large extent. And as we mentioned earlier, the government their hand is being forced. They really have to be more forthcoming because they're losing control of this whole situation. And everybody knows this is real at this point. We all know what UFOs are. Gallup polls show that most people believe in this phenomenon. Most people believe our government is hiding information. So we'll see how this all rolls out. But I am guessing that if disclosure does move forward, it's going to ramp up maybe geometrically instead of the way it's been now, which is very, very slowly. And once we get a craft in a museum, like the Roswell craft, and everyone can view it in the alien bodies, and when disclosure busts wide open, when the egg is cracked, that's when we're going to start seeing open official contact. Because that does seem to be an ET agenda. They are showing themselves over schoolyards. I've collected 100 cases of UFOs hovering over schools. My recent book is UFOs over drive-in theaters, which is...
The YouTube video was awesome, man.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it totally shocked me. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea. I'd been in this field for 35 years. I had no idea that this was a thing. They are I've got 100 cases of where they drop down and hover right above a drive-in theater and show themselves off to like 300 people. And if I've got 100 cases, and by the way, I've got like 10 more just since that video came out, that means, I mean, you can times that by 10, by 100. So if you have like, 500 people at 100 theaters, what's that, 50,000? times that by 10, you're talking 500,000 people have seen UFOs at drive-in theaters. It's a very effective method of disclosing their presence. The ETs are trying to disclose in a way that won't upset our society and won't
Right.
make us worshiping them or running away thinking they're taking over. I think they're doing it as gently as they can, but it's absolutely one of their main agendas.
I think that's, maybe what the human race perhaps needs. I mean, we talk about free energy, we talk about, them being able to heal us. It could be really, it could be good, right? It could be very positive
Yeah,
things. And, perhaps some technology that, we're unaware of that could change our lives for the better. And in a way that maybe we're not even aware of that,
yeah.
exists right now.
I think the real problem on this planet is not the ETs at all. It's elements within our government, within the military-industrial complex, the one percenters, the people who are in control of this technology that are working very hard uh, in immoral and frankly evil ways to uh, encourage divisiveness. There's an incredible amount of corruption and greed, and conspiracies are rife. I mean, they are just exploding.
Yep. I think you
Uh,
nailed it.
so that can't continue. It's just absolutely uh, can't go on. And I think it's no longer to their benefit. So I think there's probably panic at very high levels about what's going to go down, and we're having all this really weird stuff happening these last couple of years in that regard. So we'll see how this all rolls out, but there's no way we can continue to have this complete unequal distribution of wealth where 99% of the wealth is owned by like 1,000 people. No, no, that can't go on. That's ridiculous. So that's going to end. I think this is the last hurrah for these MFers. I get
Yeah,
really
I
upset.
think the monetary system in general is just, it's not the correct way to have society set up. It's just because it creates corruption, and it's just it's gonna there's just no way around it. I mean, even as far as the medical industry goes, I mean, there's not even
Yeah,
I don't want to get into conspiracy theories or anything, but I
cancer
mean,
should not be a business.
exactly,
I'm
exactly.
really, and I've talked to contactees about this. People are having really extensive contact and open communication with the ETs. They don't have money. They're all very cooperative, very telepathic. I think that's what we need to do. Is we need to. That's what the ETs are trying to get us to do. Is to become more connected to each other and realize that we are all one. We are all connected. When you hurt someone, you're hurting yourself. When you hate someone, it says more about you than them. And this idea that we're, hate each other is really not even true. We're all very much alike. We all want the same things. I don't care what political party you are, man or woman, what religion, I don't care. We all want the same things. We all just want
Yep.
love, family, health,
That's
joy.
part of the problem, though, right? There's a push for that separation, to create that separation between groups of people, whether
Yeah,
it's Republican, Democrat, black, white, gay, straight. There's this separation, and they want to create like these borders and box people into these categories when, like you said, we're all one. We all want to have the same wants and needs for the most part.
exactly. That's why I encourage people, don't buy into that. It's a false thing. It's not even true. If you talk to anyone, most people are really good people. Once they get to know you, they will give you the shirt off their back. People are actually really kind. I really think that humans are great. And once we start to really wake up and realize how close we are to each other, all that's going to fall by the wayside. And I hope it doesn't take major loss of life or widespread disasters to wake us up to that. But it might. And I'm worried about like all these false flag possibly coming up. The government, or there's an element on Earth which is trying to make ET look like the bad guy. I don't believe it for a second. I really don't. I think people have to really start thinking for themselves, look at the evidence objectively, and be moral, be good, be kind. Um, it will take us to a whole new world, a whole new society of cooperation, peace, and progress. It's going to be great.
Well, Preston, it's been a fascinating discussion. Where can we find the work that you're doing? Get a hold of some of your written work and things like that.
Hey, I appreciate that. Yeah, I do have a YouTube channel. I'm putting out videos on a pretty much weekly basis because a lot of people don't have time to read. So you can check me out there. I do have a website as well, prestondennett.weebly.com. I think if you just uh, put my name in a web search, you'll find it. Got all my books there, excerpts if you want to look into it. All my books are on Amazon and other online retailers, and you can contact me also through my website. So I always love hearing from people, whether they've got a question or a comment or a story to share. I think this is a very important subject. You may not have seen a UFO and you think, it doesn't affect me. Well, I got news for you. It sure does. If you're struggling to, make ends meet, if are, it would solve our energy crisis, our economic crisis, our environmental crisis in one fell swoop. If we could just release all this free energy technology. This is a very important subject that affects everybody profoundly, and it's going to change the world. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Well said. Hey, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thanks very much.